Hi everyone, welcome to the Server Runtime Showcase for January 2023. In this video, I'm going to give you an update of where I am with the Server Runtime SEG. So let's start with what is server runtime and why it's important. So GitLab users want to build, run, and test their code right from within the GitLab platform. Server runtime is aimed at engineering a performant and scalable remote development experience for our users. We want to be able to release a product that complements the current web IDE and brings this complete developer experience onto the platform. And when I say complete developer experience, what I mean is the same experience that you have on your local laptop running remotely in GitLab without the hassles of actually setting up your environment. So the ability to be able to clone a repository, define the shape that you need, such as the languages, the frameworks, and the IDE plugins, etc. So where are we today with this? So I've spent the last 4 months creating the first iteration of this. In these 4 months, I've figured out the plumbing and the key components that will comprise the remote development experience, such as authentication and authorization, the ability to inject IDEs, how to run securely in a custom-owned Kubernetes cluster, and things like that. So some of the key features that have been delivered are the ability to start a workspace using a dev file. So dev file is an excellent standard for how to define what an environment should look like, and you can now start an environment using a dev file. The ability to authenticate and authorize into the workspace so that only the right people have access to the code. Support for HTTPS and the injection of secrets. Auto cloning a private or public repository as soon as the workspace session starts, the ability to run code in the workspace for whether it's Node or Go or whatever language you choose, and then expose ports for web applications. If you're testing a service or a web application, you can actually view what you're creating. And then the ability to inject IDEs and run multiple containers as a part of your workspace. So whether you want to run Postgres or Redis alongside your workspace so that you want to be able to test a database connection, you can do that. The ability to change state for a workspace, to be able to stop, restart, and terminate a workspace. And of course, my favorite feature, which is the ability to run Docker in a workspace. So if you are using Docker in your workflow and you use Docker Compose, for example, you can run Docker Compose in your workspace using Sysbox as the isolation mechanism. All right. So with that, I would like to briefly touch upon the architecture of server runtime. Now, this is a slightly simplified version of the architecture. However, it covers most of the key components. The whole architecture is based on GitLab Agent for Kubernetes, which provides us a strong foundation on how we can develop features on top of Kubernetes. So GitLab Agent actually consists of two components. There's a server component called the GitLab Agent Server Component, or CAS, and then there's also the component that runs in the customer's clusters. So if you look at the diagram, what you don't need is inbound connectivity from GitLab into your cluster. So you don't need to store any of those credentials within GitLab. Instead, GitLab Agent reaches out to GitLab to understand what should be the state of the workspace, right? So whether I'm asking to start or stop or terminate a workspace, that information is coming from that connection from GitLab Agent to GitLab, and that's all outbound. So once GitLab Agent gets that information from GitLab on what workspaces to create, it then spins up those workspaces. And those workspaces are nothing but pods and Kubernetes, the containers underneath the hood. And essentially what happens is we run an IDE alongside your workspace. For example, if you've got a Go or a Node.js workspace, we run an IDE, we'll inject an IDE into the workspace, and we'll also add on top of that an authentication layer so that only the right people can access that workspace. So once our container started, we create other objects in Kubernetes, such as services and ingresses and things like that, so that users can actually access that workspace, right? So users want to go online and then right from the browser get into the workspace, and that's what this enables. Again, this is all based on the dev file standard. So we use the dev file standard and the dev file library to actually spin up these workspaces. Okay, so with that, I'd like to take you through a demo of how this actually works. So I start my journey from a repository in GitLab. This is a standard Node.js repository, which is an Express app, which just has the simple hello world message when you visit the root. So I can actually, the important thing about this repository is the fact that it has a def file.yaml, which defines what the shape of my environment should look like. So I'm defining a runtime, which is node, and I'm also defining that I need a Postgres database to store maybe some data, right? So that's the shape of my environment. I can go ahead and start a workspace by clicking on the open workspace button. I can do this from an MR or from a branch or from the screen here. So I've gone ahead and selected a ref, and I can select an ID to inject. Now I have some certain choices here. I can inject VS Code or VI. I could just go to terminal, or I could select Jupyter Hub. We can select multiple IDEs, or we can inject multiple IDs in the future. And so I can go ahead and hit the create workspace button to actually start the workspace creation. Now what's happening behind the scenes is that GitLab agent's picking this up and starting to provision the workspace. And as it does that, I see an update of the status as it's happening. So the workspace is starting up. Let me just show you on the Kubernetes side what's happening very quickly. So if I look at namespaces, you can see that a new isolated namespace has been created for this workspace. And if I look at the pods in this namespace, you can see that a pod is getting ready to run in this workspace. So now if I hit refresh, it should start running in a bit. So the workspace is now running. I can go ahead and open up the workspace. And the first thing it asks me to do is authenticate. So this is where the authentication and authorization takes place. We use OAuth2 proxy for that. And so the authentication then authenticates the user with GitLab, but also authorizes to make sure that I'm the owner of the workspace, and so only I should have access to the workspace. So that's it. So I'm now in my workspace. I'm in a full-fledged VS Code IDE. I can go ahead and open up my workspaces folder where I've got this example. So it's pre-cloned for me. So it's already been cloned, and all the dependencies have already been included. So if you see, I've got this main.js. I can start exploring it. I have my def file YAML here. So the first thing I want to do is, once I have access to my workspace, is I want to go ahead and start testing out my app, running my app, right? So I can go ahead and install my dependencies by running npm, and because I've specified the runtime there in the dev file, I have npm in this workspace. So that's gone and install my dependencies. I can go ahead and say npm start to actually go ahead and start the application. Now, because in my dev file, I'd also specified the fact that I need to expose a port, so I can actually visit this application. So I can go and put in the port number here in front of that application. And if I go click yes, you can see that it shows me that Hello World application right there. I can actually make changes to this application and see the changes immediately reflect. So I can go ahead and say hello GitLab workspaces. And as soon as I hit save and refresh here, you'll see that it's changed the text, right? So it makes the development experience really seamless, just like you would on your local machine. Also, because this runs multiple containers, I'm also running Postgres as a part of this workspace. I can actually access that Postgres container as well. So here I've got a simple DB file which accesses Postgres running on localhost. And so just like I would on my local, if I had Postgres installed, I could go ahead and access Postgres. So I'm going to go ahead and create a table called test and insert some values into that table. I can run some queries. And you can see that the hello world is returned from that table that I created. So again, I have access to multiple dependencies. I can install Postgres and Redis and things like that. So now that I'm ready, I can go ahead and create a branch and commit these changes. So I could say git branch, actually check out feature 1. So I'm creating a branch here. I can go ahead and add my changes to the branch, commit. I will have to configure my email address. Go ahead and commit and push. And so with that, because I'm authenticated into GitLab and I have an OAuth token, I can actually go ahead and push those changes. So now I can, straight away I could go ahead and create a merge request if I wanted to for this branch, right? And that's very useful. So that's the entire experience. So once I'm done with my workspace, I can go ahead and actually terminate my workspace as well. So I can go ahead and click terminate. and that would actually terminate my workspace. So that's the entire process of how GitLab Workspaces could work. Okay, so with that, I'd like to cover what's next. So the last 4 months have been very fruitful as I've determined, I think, some of the most complex parts of the architecture. In this time, another team, the remote development team, has been formed within the editor group and also have been investing great approaches on what could work for this. So what I'll be doing is joining forces with them in the next few months and coming together to determine the most suitable architecture, firming up our execution plan, and taking it to fruition in the next few months. What we want to be able to do is pilot this with a select set of customers, and that will be our priority for the foreseeable future. Thank you so much for listening in.